Good afternoon. My name is Swea Hart, and I want to thank you for attending the Preparing for the 2015 NAEP Assessment Part 2 webinar. Today, we will review the NAEP timeline. Where are we as we move into December? Provide an overview of the upcoming activities. You should refer to your checklist that was sent in October. The bulk of the webinar will focus on the inclusions and accommodations for NAEP 2015, and then we will end with a Q&A session. Registration and school update information was completed in October and early November. The school student lists were submitted for the district as of November 21st. This includes all students in grades 4, 8, and 12 at the participating schools. The student information was securely uploaded via NAEP's electronic filing process. Now we are moving into the next phase of prepare for assessment. As part of the preparation, you will receive a packet on December 2nd that contains a red folder and a pamphlet. The pamphlet details activities for the school coordinator for the month of December and January. The red folder is used to maintain any sensitive student data or materials that are confidential and you need to print it out. Four activities will become available on December 8th. Full access will be granted to only those school coordinators that are registered on the MyNAEP website. Those activities include update list of sampled students, include students with disabilities and English language learners, notify parents, and manage questionnaires. If your school has not registered a school coordinator, you will not have the ability to go in and complete these activities. So I would encourage you to get that done this week, please. One nice enhancement of the MyNAEP website is the tutorial section. Each activity has its own watch tutorial and get started. You will need to complete this step and press finish before you're able to move on to do any other activities. This section explains the information you will need to collect at your school before starting a particular MyNAEP activity. The purpose of update list of sampled students is to review the list and make any needed changes prior to the actual assessment date. The school coordinator is going to identify any students that may have withdrawn or are ineligible, provide missing demographic data and make any corrections, and update classifications of students with disabilities and English language learners. Within each activity, in the center of the page, there is a blue box, and that blue box outlines the steps that need to be completed. Right below that blue box is a section that allows you to review certain reports. This is where you would gain access to your student list. And next to the reports box is additional resources that you can refer to if you need to. But if you have any questions on a particular session or activity, there is a help button in the top blue banner, or you can get on live chat with someone from NAEP and they will be happy to assist you. School coordinators or a designee of a student with disability and ELL specialist will need to indicate how those students will participate in NAEP and the accommodations that they will be receiving. So the steps are to provide information for students with disabilities, provide information for English language learners, and then grant access to your specialists if you would either like them to enter the information or to just verify the information that you as the school coordinator has already entered. The specialist will not have the ability to do anything else in the NAEP other than enter information about students with disabilities. If a student is not an SD or ELL student, then that particular specialist will not have access to their records. There are certain accommodations that are allowed and others that are not. This particular session of the NAEP website allows you to identify all accommodations that a student is getting. So if they're not on a list of allowable accommodations, you can list them under the other section, and you would need to talk with the NAEP representative to determine if it could be allowed. There are times when NAEP is not aware of certain accommodations that some students are receiving, and they have given the school the ability to administer with that particular accommodation. So just because it's not on the list, I would still encourage you to make sure you document it with that particular student, and then the NAEP representative will work with you to determine if that student is still eligible to participate. The school coordinator must notify parents and guardians about the NAEP assessment before the scheduled assessment date. I'm encouraging everyone to try to send out their assessment letters to parents in the month of December, not to wait till January. If we can get that communication out earlier, the better. That would be great. There is going to be a template, a letter template, that will be available on the NAEP website that you can download, and then you will need to customize it to your specific school with the date of your assessment. Distribute this letter to parents and guardians of students that will be participating in the NAEP assessment. And after you have sent the letter out, you will need to upload a copy of the letter into the NAEP system that will be used to verify that you have notified parents of the assessment. School coordinators will need to distribute online questionnaires that collect information on school policy, characteristics, teacher training, and instructional practices. As the school coordinator, you're going to identify who the questionnaire respondents should be, send welcome emails and links to the questionnaires themselves, and then monitor completion and follow up with reminders if teachers or principals have not completed the actual questionnaires. At this point, I'm going to stop discussing the activities that will be coming up in December, and I will be moving into the NAEP inclusion and accommodations. If you have questions on the previous section, please remember to put your questions in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of this webinar. NAGB, or the National Assessment Governing Board, sets a policy, and they explore ways to ensure that NAEP continues to include as many students as possible, and to do so in a consistent manner for all jurisdictions that are being assessed. In 2010, NAGB adopted a policy, and the purpose of this policy was to help maximize student participation in NAEP. They wanted to reduce variation in exclusion rates across states and districts, so they developed uniform national rules for including students. And they always want to ensure that NAEP is fully representative of all students, including students with disabilities and English language learners. This slide indicates the reading exclusion rate for the district compared to the nation. As you can see, in both 4th and 8th grade reading, after the 2010 policy was instated, the district did quite well in lowering their exclusion rates. In fact, in 2013, in both grades, we were below the nation in exclusion rates. That same holds true for math exclusion rates. Even in 8th grade math, our exclusion rate was less than 1%. And we'd like to continue that trend. That's an excellent trend, and we'd like to continue doing what we can to make sure that as many students can be included and provide the necessary accommodations so that they are able to participate. There are two versions of the inclusion policy. Two for the operational assessment, which is the paper pencil, and 2 for the technology-based assessment. We only have 2 schools participating in the TBA pilot in mathematics and reading. Therefore, I'm not planning to spend a lot of time talking about those inclusion policies today. I will follow up with a webinar specific to those schools that will be administering the assessment through the TBA process. The bulk of today will focus on the operational assessment because 98% of our schools will be doing the paper pencil in mathematics and reading, grades 4, 8, and 12. At this point, I'm going to go into detail and explain what each accommodation is. But first, I want to talk about which students may be excluded. As far as students with disabilities, students who participate in the alternative assessment for states may be excluded from NAEP. In our case, it is the NCSIC, the National Center State Collaborative. If a student is identified to take NCSIC, then they would be excluded from NAEP. All other students with disabilities should participate with or without the NAEP allowed accommodations. Those students that can receive accommodations are students that have an IEP plan or a 504 plan. For English language learners, students who have been enrolled in the United States for less than 1 full academic year before the NAEP assessment will be considered ineligible. They may be excluded. All other ELL students should participate with or without NAEP allowed accommodations. Formerly ELL students may not receive accommodations on the NAEP. They must be current ELL identified students. Some students may require extra time to complete the assessment. If a student is being assessed in the regular session, extra time is allowed after the time session has been completed to go back and continue working on the cognitive sections of the assessment. If a student is being assessed in a separate session, they may work at their own pace. The only limit for extended time, though, is that the student may not take more than 3 times the regular time allocated for the cognitive sections of the booklet. So for paper pencil, there are 2 25-minute cognitive sections. So the maximum amount of extended time a student is allowed is 150 minutes. However, the assessment is not a speeded test, and it's unlikely that a student would require much extra time. If students usually take an untimed test, schools sometimes mark extended time for all students, but that's not necessary. Sometimes a student or one of the accommodations that he or she receives requires small group accommodation. Although there's not a firm definition of how many students constitute a small group, NAEP usually recommends 5 or fewer students. However, there is flexibility around this, and 1 to 2 additional students can be tested in a small group, particularly if the group does not require read aloud. Now, if read aloud is required, then the students will be grouped by subject. Accommodations such as read aloud most or all, any portion of the assessment or the directions provided in Spanish, breaks during testing, and accommodations requiring interaction with an aide, like for a scribe or sign language or a student that uses Braille. That will require that the student be assessed in a separate session, such as a small group or one-on-one. Some students require words, phrases. Sorry about that. By raising their hands, all students may have the directions read aloud, repeated or reworded, so that they understand what to do and where to record their answers. It is not considered an accommodation. However, some students require this as an accommodation, which means it will be provided automatically without needing to raise their hand. This can be administered in regular session or it can be done in a separate session. Some students require words, phrases, or sentences to be read aloud to them. And these students are offered the read aloud occasional in English accommodation. This accommodation can usually be administered in a regular session using the student's originally assigned booklet, but it is not allowed in reading. Other students who require most or all of the assessment booklet to be read aloud to them are offered the read aloud most or all in English accommodation and will be assessed in a separate session according to the subject of their booklets. All students requiring this accommodation in the same subject will be given the same booklet version for ease of administration. Again, this accommodation is not allowed in reading. Students requesting breaks during testing can take breaks as requested throughout the assessment at predetermined intervals or take the assessment in more than one sitting in a single day. This accommodation requires a separate session. There's no specific requirement regarding the length of time for a break, how often or how many breaks can be taken, but the only requirement is that the assessment must be given in a single day. NAEP introduced the calculator version of the test in 2013. Students who require a calculator for both cognitive sections will be assigned a booklet with 2 calculator blocks. This accommodation can be used in the regular session. In addition, a calculator version of the test will be available with read aloud and Spanish-English version of the test. However, these booklets must be administered in a separate session. Sometimes a student will need a familiar person to administer the assessment. This should be done in a separate session with an aide or other school staff person administering that session. The NAEP representative will provide the appropriate script and instructions for administering this session before assessment day. The response orally to a scribe accommodation requires the student to respond by pointing to his or her answers. The scribe then records the student's responses in the assessment booklet. The school coordinator should arrange for the person with whom a student usually works with to be available for that session. This type of accommodation should be conducted in a separate session. NAEP provides large print versions of the assessment booklets for students who are visually impaired. These booklets have been enlarged to 129%. This accommodation can be administered in a regular session. NAEP also allows magnification devices provided by the school for visually impaired students. Some devices, such as enlargement programs or closed-circuit television, may introduce security issues, since in most cases the NAEP booklet will need to be scanned before the assessment in order to make use of the equipment. School coordinators should consult with the NAEP representative for details on how to arrange for the appropriate non-disclosure forms to be completed if this advanced scanning is necessary. Sometimes students require a template or special equipment to respond, or they may require special seating away from distractions. A template may be a cutout or an overlay. A cutout is designed to obscure the other parts of the page. An overlay is a clear colored sheet that changes the color of the page and enhances the contrast between the writing on the page and the page itself. These are provided by the school, and the student should be used to using these for instruction and or testing. It should not be introduced if the student doesn't already use it as an accommodation. A special writing tool can be a large diameter pencil, pencil grips, or any other special writing tool. For students who require a computer or typewriter to respond, this equipment must be provided by the school. Depending on the noise level of the machine, the equipment can be used in the regular session. However, use of spelling or grammar check functions on the computer, that is not allowed and would need to be disabled. Students requiring preferential seating may be seated in a designated area away from any distractions, such as using a study carrel, near special equipment, or at the front of the room in order to see or hear more easily. NAEP provides a specially processed version of the assessment booklet written in Braille for visually impaired students. The response in Braille accommodation requires that a visually impaired student records his or her responses using a Braille output device, a slate and stylus, or an electronic Braille note taker provided by the school, or uses a scribe to record the responses. If a scribe or special equipment is required, the school coordinator will need to arrange for these resources to be available for the session, and also check prior to the assessment that the equipment is in working order. Both presentation and response in Braille require an aid should be administered in a separate session. For the presentation and sign language accommodation, a qualified sign language interpreter provided by the school will sign the instructions and some or all of the tests for the student. It is not allowed for reading. For the response and sign language accommodation, the student signs his or her responses to a scribe provided by the school. Both presentation and response in sign language must be administered in a separate session. Some English language learners may require a bilingual dictionary, which must be either a hard copy or handheld device. Cannot be on a computer, with word-for-word translations only. It can be in any language. NAEP does not provide bilingual dictionaries, so students should bring their own dictionaries to the assessment. This accommodation will not be allowed for reading. Some English language learners need the general directions read aloud in Spanish. For this accommodation, only the instructions in the bilingual section script, which are the same for all students, are read aloud. This accommodation is allowed for paper pencil subjects and must be administered in a separate session. NAEP has Spanish-English booklets available for English language learners who require them. The booklet contains the directions and test questions side by side in Spanish and English. This will be an accommodation allowed for math. It is not allowed in reading or for grade 12 students in any subject. While some English language learners require only the directions read aloud in Spanish, others need words, phrases, sentences, or even the entire test to be read aloud in Spanish. Students requiring this accommodation will take the assessment using the Spanish-English version of the test provided by NAEP. Again, the accommodation is not allowed in reading, only allowed in math, and is not allowed for 12th grade students in any subject. Finally, there are other accommodations that are allowed by NAEP, such as the read aloud to self or having an administrator wear a small microphone to conduct the session. In many cases, these types of accommodations can be administered in the regular session without disrupting other students. Schools should discuss any other accommodations with the NAEP representative during or prior to the pre-assessment review call. Now we're going to move into what is not allowed as a NAEP accommodation. Tape recording answers, taking tests over several days, the use of an abacus, arithmetic tables, graph paper, or any ruler other than what NAEP provides, rewording or simplifying test questions, and use of a dictionary, thesaurus, or any spelling or grammar checking software or devices other than what NAEP provides. As always, queuing to stay on task will not be allowed. Continuing with the not allowed NAEP accommodations, oral or written responses translated into written English, directions or test material read aloud in a language other than Spanish, or a bilingual version of the test other than in Spanish-English. Most accommodations are allowed in all subjects, but there are a few exceptions. In reading, read aloud in English and presentations of the test items in sign language is not allowed. The Spanish-English version of the test items read aloud in Spanish, or use of a bilingual dictionary is not allowed. Now I just want to give you a brief update on the technology-based assessment. There are universal design elements in the TBA pilot that are available to all students, and they are provided by the test delivery system. The other accommodations are available to only students on an IEP, 504 plan, or ELL, and they are divided into two types. They would be provided by test delivery system or provided outside of the test delivery system. That concludes the inclusion and accommodations section of the webinar. I would like to let you know that for next month's webinar, we will be talking about how to submit current roster of students, planning for the assessment day, conducting your pre-assessment review call, and encouraging participation. If there are any other open items that you would like to discuss in the next webinar, I would encourage you to send that information to me prior to the next scheduled webinar. I want to also make sure that you know when a NAEP representative contacts you and schedules time with you, that time is not a quick call. Therefore, you need to be prepared to speak with them anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, specifically to the different activities. The pre-assessment review call in January could take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half. So please allot enough time for you to be able to go through the different activities with your NAEP representative and get any questions and information answered during those calls. At this time, I'm going to answer questions that you have posed in the chat. When a student takes a break, that time does not count as part of the test time. That is correct. The maximum allotted time does not include the break time. Will ELL students that will not take the reading test, will they take the math test? Yes. If students are not able to take the reading test, they can take the math test. But please note that students have been identified for one test or the other. They will not be taking both reading and math. They will take 2 sessions of math or 2 sessions of reading. Will NAEP be providing the proctors? Yes, NAEP will come to your school with a team of individuals based on the logistics of your assessment. If you're just assessing one class, they may bring 2 to 3 individuals that will support that one class. But if you have small accommodations or one-on-one assessments taking place, they may need to bring additional individuals. Will NAEP bring testing materials with them, or will they be sent ahead of time? All testing materials will be controlled and maintained by the NAEP representatives and their team. So they will bring everything that is needed for the assessment to your school on the day of the assessment. They will not send materials to you in advance. That includes scratch paper, pencils, the answer booklets, instructions, if there are scripts that your staff need to use, if they would be administering, if they're an aide or a scribe, all of that information will be delivered as the NAEP team comes to your school. It will not be to your school in advance. Who should receive questionnaire? The questionnaires are going to go to your principal and your teachers. Will teachers need to cover up material in their classroom? Yes, it's important that we maintain the fidelity of the tests. We don't want to give any students any additional advantages compared to other students because content is being displayed on your walls. So we encourage you to definitely cover up any type of strategies. Things that you would normally cover up for the state assessment need to be covered up for the NAEP assessment. Yes, a NAEP team will manage small groups as well. The sampled list of students will become available on December 8th. That will be under the Prepare for Assessment tab. As you update your student list, there will be a report that you can print out that includes all of your students that are being sampled. If there are any accommodations that a student currently gets, but it is not allowed on NAEP, that is definitely something you should discuss with the NAEP representative. If your currents do not currently have an accommodation or allowability to test in Spanish, then that is not something that NAEP would assign. All accommodations are being determined by your IEP team, your specialists in your schools, and NAEP is just supporting what you have already identified for that particular student, and they're helping provide clarification, but they will not be assigning new accommodations to take the actual NAEP assessment. That is something based on information that you have already determined for the student as a required accommodation for testing and class participation. Is there a website for parents to get more information about the assessment? Yes, and I will upload the information on the MyNAEP website, links to excellent websites and videos that provide additional information to parents, to students, to your staff about NAEP, about accommodations, about the assessment itself. I will also make it available on the OSSE website. Can a school have 2 site coordinators for testing? We are split across buildings. There can only be 1 school coordinator identified for a particular school. Even if you have various grades or various campuses, there can only be 1 school coordinator. Now, if you try to add another school coordinator, you will override the initial school coordinator. There is a possibility for you to request that your schools be split and that you could possibly assign a separate school coordinator if you split like the 4th and the 8th grade. I would like for the individual who's concerned about having more than 1 school coordinator, if you would contact me offline, I'd be more than happy to try to figure out some options for you. Will the parent letters, the notification letters, be available in languages other than English? We have an English and a Spanish version. If you need any additional languages, please let me know individually, and I will see if OSSE is able to help with any type of translation. Do students placed in small group need to have the same exact accommodations? That will be determined between you and the NAEP representative. Yes, in most cases you'd like to group them by subject and similar accommodations, but there could be some variations that would not distract or impact students, that they could be combined. Who decides what session the students will take? Will we know what sessions the students will be taking? Yes. On December 8th, when you see your student list, you will be able to know which students will be taking math, which students will be participating, have been sampled, and which students will be taking the reading assessment. Can the special education coordinator log in to address the accommodations provided? Yes, but first you as a school coordinator must give them access. You must identify, you will send them an email, and that email will allow them to register, and they will gain access to either both students with disabilities and ELL or one or the other. Students will only take 2 sessions of math or 2 sessions of reading. You will not have a student taking a math session and a reading session. Will the assessments be all day? No. The maximum time for the assessment is about 90 minutes. You can work it out with your NAEP representative as to the time of day that you'd like that assessment to occur. It does not have to be the first thing in the morning. If for whatever reason you have an aide come in and they only come in the afternoon, again, work it out with the NAEP team to determine what are the best times to administer the assessment. Will the school need to purchase calculators? for students who do not get accommodations, whether it be a calculated portion of the math test. There should not be any need for the school to purchase additional calculators. If there is a calculator portion, the NAEP team will bring anything and everything that you need to administer the assessment. Thank you very much for participating on today's call, and I look forward to talking to you in the near future. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can either email me at swea.hart@dc.gov or contact me via my cell phone. Thank you, and have a happy and safe Thanksgiving.